Disclaimer: this content is created for spiritual reflection, personal growth, and philosophical discussion. The themes discussed, including solar flash, Archangel Michael, Pleiadians, and collective shifts, are symbolic and archetypal interpretations, not predictions of physical events or financial outcomes. Nothing in this video should be considered medical, legal, or financial advice. Please use your own discernment and critical thinking while engaging with this material. THE solar flash ISNOT. What you think? For years, many have spoken about something called the solar flash. A moment, an event, a burst of light that would change everything overnight. Some imagined it as a cosmic reset. Some imagined it as a physical transformation. Others believed it would divide timelines, collapse systems, or instantly awaken humanity. But what if the real shift has never been about a single day? What if the solar flash is not something happening to the world, but something happening within you? Before we go any further, pause for a moment. Ask yourself honestly, have you felt different lately? Not afraid, not chaotic, just aware. More observant, less reactive, less interested in noise, more drawn to silence. This is where the real conversation begins. Because the solar flash, in its deepest symbolic meaning, is not a physical explosion in the sky. It is an ignition of consciousness. And it does not arrive with fear. It arrives with clarity. For a long time, spiritual communities have externalized transformation. We looked upward. We looked outward. We waited. We waited for disclosure. We waited for rescue. We waited for systems to collapse. We waited for a sign. But growth does not come from waiting. It comes from integration. Let us reframe this completely. The sun, in every ancient culture, has symbolized illumination, awareness, truth. When light enters darkness, nothing dramatic happens. Darkness simply disappears. No fight, no explosion, no war, just illumination. So when we speak of a solar flash, we are speaking of an increase in awareness, not globally imposed, personally realized. And this is where Archangel Michael enters the conversation, not as a literal wing being descending from the clouds, but as an archetype. Michael represents sovereignty, courage, clarity, the sword of discernment, the energy that cuts illusion without aggression. When people say Michael is here, what they often mean, whether consciously or not, is that the energy of sovereignty is rising. People are thinking for themselves again. People are questioning narratives. People are stepping back from fear-based programming. This is not destruction. It is maturation. And the Pleiadians? They are often described as benevolent star beings guiding humanity. But on a deeper symbolic level, they represent something else. Higher perspective. Expanded awareness. The part of you that observes your thoughts rather than being consumed by them. The part of you that sees beyond drama. The part of you that senses patterns instead of reacting emotionally to headlines. When you feel less reactive. When you feel less controlled by outrage. When you begin valuing peace over chaos. That is the shift. Not a spaceship. Not a flash in the sky. But a shift in perception. Now let us speak about the 3 days of darkness. This phrase has traveled across many traditions, often interpreted as literal darkness. But psychologically, it represents the dark night of the soul, the moment when old identity structures collapse, when illusions fade, when you realize that external authority cannot define your inner reality. It is uncomfortable. Not because the world is ending, but because your old self is ending. And transformation is rarely dramatic. It is quiet. It is subtle. It is internal. You wake up one day and realize You are no longer triggered by what once controlled you. You are no longer chasing what once obsessed you. You are no longer afraid of what once intimidated you. That is illumination. That is the solar flash. And here is something most people miss. Transformation does not come from force. It comes from readiness. If you try to force awakening, you create resistance. If you try to predict exact timelines, you create anxiety. If you try to attach spiritual growth to financial outcomes or external collapse, you distort its essence. The real shift happening in 2026 is not a collapse of systems. It is a collapse of dependence. People are realizing that no system can replace inner stability. No leader can replace self-responsibility. No external savior can substitute inner alignment. This is not rebellion. It is evolution. For decades, fear-based narratives have dominated collective attention. Crisis after crisis. Shock after shock. But something is changing. People are tired of fear. Not exhausted. Tired. And when fatigue reaches a certain level, consciousness recalibrates. It seeks simplicity. It seeks authenticity. It seeks sovereignty. That is the quiet revolution. Not loud, not violent, not chaotic. Quiet, individual, gradual. You may notice it in yourself first. You scroll less. You react less. You need less validation. You feel less urgency to prove anything. You begin to value depth over stimulation. This is not coincidence. It is integration. The solar flash, in its most refined meaning, is a threshold of awareness. Not an event, a threshold. Once crossed, you cannot return to unconsciousness. You may try, but it feels uncomfortable. Because once you see clearly, you cannot unsee. And clarity is not dramatic. It is stabilizing. Now let us address something important. There is a temptation in spiritual communities to turn every energetic shift into a prophecy, to assign dates, to create countdowns, to interpret every solar flare as confirmation. But true growth does not require urgency. It requires presence. If you need an external sign to validate your awareness, you are still outsourcing your power. And sovereignty means this. You trust your perception. You do not need mass confirmation. You do not need viral agreement. You feel the shift because you are the shift. The sun has always shined. But when clouds move away, you experience its warmth more directly. That is what is happening. The clouds of distraction are thinning. Not for everyone, but for those ready to notice. And readiness is not about intelligence. It is about willingness. Willingness to examine beliefs. Willingness to question narratives. Willingness to release emotional addiction to drama. This is not glamorous work. It is quiet work, but it is powerful. The solar flash is not a spectacle. It is a stabilization of awareness. And stabilization does not produce chaos. It produces discernment. You become harder to manipulate, harder to emotionally hijack, harder to polarize. Not because you are detached from reality, but because you are anchored within yourself. This is where the archetype of Michael becomes relevant again. The sword is not used to attack. It is used to cut illusion. Illusion about power. Illusion about dependency. Illusion about fear. And when illusion dissolves, what remains is responsibility, not blame. Responsibility for your state, for your reactions, for your alignment. And this is the real transformation few want to talk about. Because it is easier to wait for a cosmic event than to examine internal patterns. It is easier to hope for a flash than to do shadow work. But shadow work is the 3 days of darkness. It is the confrontation of self-deception. It is the humility of realizing you participated in your own limitation, not through fault, through unconsciousness. And once awareness enters, blame dissolves. You do not blame yourself. You integrate, you adjust, you evolve. That is illumination. So what does this mean practically? It means the event is gradual. The shift is layered. The awakening is individualized. And you do not need to convince anyone else it is happening. Because awakening is not a competition. It is a maturation process. Some move quickly. Some move slowly. Some resist. Some embrace. But forcing collective timelines only creates tension. The most powerful thing you can do right now is simple. Stabilize your nervous system. Reduce unnecessary input. Strengthen your inner clarity. This is not dramatic advice. It is foundational. Because the next stage of human development is not technological. It is psychological. The ability to hold complexity without panic. The ability to observe without reacting. The ability to remain sovereign in a world of noise. That is evolution. And evolution does not announce itself with fireworks. It announces itself with peace. You may notice your interests changing, your relationships shifting, your priorities reorganizing. Not because of a cosmic shockwave, but because awareness reorganizes identity. The old version of you dissolves quietly, and the new version does not shout, it stabilizes. This is the solar flash, an internal ignition, a recalibration of perception, a return to discernment. And here is the paradox. The more grounded you become, the less dramatic the world appears. Because fear amplifies distortion, clarity reduces it. And when enough individuals stabilize internally, collective dynamics shift naturally, not through force, through resonance. So instead of asking, when will it happen? Ask, how am I integrating now? Instead of searching the sky for confirmation, examine your reactions. Are you calmer? More observant? Less reactive? That is the shift. You do not need thunder to validate growth. Sometimes the most powerful transformation feels almost ordinary, until you look back and realize you are not who you were. And that is the only evidence required. The solar flash is not coming. It is unfolding, not as spectacle, but as maturity, not as destruction, but as discernment, not as external intervention, but as internal sovereignty. And if you feel this quietly stabilizing within you, then you are not waiting. You are embodying. And embodiment is the real awakening. If this perspective resonates with you, share in the comments what changes you have noticed within yourself recently. Not dramatic predictions, not timelines, but internal shifts. Because awareness grows stronger when articulated, and sovereignty strengthens when expressed. The real shift is not what you fear. It is what you are becoming.